Okay, I'm just going to kind of do a review and going over installing the flap handle hardware and everything. So if you look at my forum post, which you may be, where you saw this link, but in the assemblies manual, the new manual is page 2-1, and it talks about getting the parts together and so forth for the manual. And then there's a couple of figures here that kind of show all the parts. You'll see this part, cable bushings. So yeah, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take the little bushings that come with it here. They'll have an opening in the end, and you're basically just going to take a little rubber hammer, get those started, and pound those in. And the actuator rod. And one of the things I want to say about this, and I have the rod in here already, but I want to go over that because this picture really isn't right. The rod is going to, this top part has the bent 90-degree angle on it. In this picture, they show you that it looks like this part with the round hole where we're going to mount to the trigger later, it looks like it's laying flat, and it looks like this is pointing upwards. And that's not correct. That rod should be turned, if this was a rod, it would be turned to the left, so that this little part here, where the round ring is, would be sideways. And then the top with the little top 90-degree coming off of it would be facing straight left. It would be laying flat down with the flap handle sitting like it is, this is if you were sitting in the aircraft looking forward in front of the aircraft, looking back towards the flap handles, just like this. So this is going to be the flap handle. You can see how it has a big curve that comes over here. These are the two little horns with the flaps rods are going to mount to later in the wing root. So this is the angle that it is. So if it's laying like this, ignore that picture, it's wrong. And you're going to turn it sideways so that you can see this is finished. The installation is finished here. And this is the little pawl. Show you the back side. This is the pawl. It's pushed up there now where you can't see it. That will go out and go to the other piece where it'll ratchet down, the ratchet piece. So this little pawl is held on by that angle of that little rod turning to the left. So it's going to go through here, have a washer, and it's got a cotter pin holding it in place. So when you lay it down and bend it, you can see the angle you're going to bend it. You're going to have to, it's going to go from right here. It's attached, that round ring part is attached to the bottom of the trigger handle right here. So you can see when I move this, it's coming up. Let's see if I can, as I move the trigger, it moves that pawl up. And you can see the rod in there, and that rod is going to the left, okay? So this is pretty much square, looking head on. You see the bend in this here. So just lay the rod. I just hold it up to the center. It's going to go up into this tube. So I put it back here to the round ring, right underneath here where it's going to mount, and I turn it sideways so it actually would be flush, not flat upwards. The hole will be to the left and right because it's going to mount right there. The bottom part of this trigger has another hole, and there's a pin that goes through there, and that holds that rod on there. So you can see it needs to be turned to the left so that rod will go up on there. And actually it goes on the right side. You can see right down in there, you can see the indentation right there. That's where it's going through. So anyway, that's the way it wants to be oriented. And so I hold it up next to the side here, and I look sideways. And so the first bend I make is I bend it, and I put my hand down here somewhere, and I just kind of take the rod and I bend it up until when I get through, I can look down here, and it's pretty much in the center all the way up to there, okay? And then the second bend you have to do is you have to bend it this way, obviously. So then you're going to come over here, it's straight to here, then it makes a turn. So then I come over here and put my hand here, and I bend it this way until I can lay it on top of the tube here, and it'll come up, obviously, and go through the center this way. So you got it when you hold it on top, it'll be centered, and when you hold it on the side, it's centered, you'll have it, okay? So that gets the bent part done. Make sure that's really, really good, because if it's in here binding, if you go to do this and that rod is binding anywhere across here, it's hitting the side of this tube, it can be rough, you know. And when I'm getting done, I always spray a little lubricant that I think they call it LP2, or I have to go look. It's kind of recommended for all these little spray areas, but you don't use some spray, silicone or whatever. But I just put some, and you can even grease that rod with a little bit of white grease. See, I keep this white grease. And I use a little touch-up paintbrush. I just keep it in there. This has done about 7 airplanes already. And that's the easiest way I can stick it down in the holes of stuff, along with putting it on the bolt shoulder when I go through there to lubricate stuff. So anywhere I've got something that rotates, you know, I put a little grease. So like here, I put some with that little paintbrush tip through the holes in the trigger, through the holes, and then I put a little grease on the bolts themselves too, or the pins that go through them, to keep it greased up nicely. You could even put a little grease and just put it on the rod itself so it goes up there. If it makes contact anywhere, it'll slide very easily, because you want that to work, you know, nice and easy. Okay, so that's kind of one of the most important parts, is getting that thing bent, you know, correctly. And so they explain that, and you're going to put you just kind of have to work that spring on. You come from this side, you just have to kind of bend it and push it and pull it till you can get it around that corner right there. And then you put that washer on there, okay? And then we're going to put these spring stop screws. You see what I go through, I put these notes. Of course, I build multiple aircraft, so I always want to know where to find it instead of having to go searching. So I always put notes. T1 is where the tote number 1 is where I find these little screws. These little screws are here and here. You just screw them in. And what happens then, we're going to slide. You're going to take this. This is going to have the spring on it and the washer. And then we're going to take it down to this end here before this cap is on. And you'll see it's open at the end. You have to put it down in there where the spring will fit. And you're just going to put it and slide it up in there. The washer that you put on there, the spring and the washer obviously will be back this way. So as you push it in, the washer's going to get caught by these 2 screws and then hold the spring back in this direction. So it kind of preloads that spring to do that. Once you get that up there, then we're going to go ahead and, first we are going to install that. I can see here the pictures. I think these pictures are pretty much right, but it's just not showing you the double bend. Well, it kind of is. This is showing you how it's bending to the right, and this is showing you how it's bending up that way. That's just the wrong one. That's correct. This page is correct. Everything here with the trigger assembly then is what we're going to do. Next is attach that part of the push rod to that lower piece of the trigger. Excuse me. And you see it has a little cutout there. So that trigger pin goes in there, and like they say here, that's always a little tight. I actually just ream it out just a little bit to make it fit, and of course grease it up good. I don't want a tight fit. I don't know why they made that a tight fit, but I guess actually it rotates probably on that ring, but grease that up good. So that gets the rod on this end before we insert it, okay? And then we're going to take the Pawl assembly, and it shows you here kind of, you can see the direction it goes on. So obviously this is the rod, and it's making the 90 degree this way. So you put it on like this so that the little pawl catches here, and the circle, the round part is where it's going to attach, is going to be on this side. So that's going to be facing upwards. So then I talk about how to assemble it. Then we're talking about sliding it up there like I was saying. So we're going to slide the completed piece. It'll have the pawl and the trigger on it. It's going to slide up into that end, which is going to be right underneath here. You'll have to slide it from the end down here because that's round. It won't fit. So slide it from the end, slide it all the way up. Once you got it all the way up there, I take this, it'll be spring loaded, of course, so it'll be wanting to push this backwards. I take one hand and push it up there. Then I love using these little picks. Then I just take that pick, and when I get it up there with one hand, I stick that pick through there and hold it in place. And then that lets me go over and grab my pen and everything and get ready. Then I can pull that out enough to where I can come on the other side and wiggle it, and get the pen started in there. And then of course the washer and the cotter pin after that. These things I use these almost every day with everything. So that'll get it up to here and get that installed. So then we're gonna turn back around and we're gonna turn this over the other way. And on this side then, you're gonna have two bushings. You're gonna have a pin that goes through here. So this is obviously, this can only go one way. If I squeeze the trigger here, you can see how it's working. And the pin goes in from the outboard side going towards the inboard. And these are the two little bushings right there. Here, and here is a bushing. So just put the pin in a little ways, put that bushing in, run that through it, and then put that bushing. I have not, the current bushings that come with it, I haven't had to file them. Like they say in the manual, you may have to adjust them a little bit. If they won't fit in there perfectly, you may have to take a file and cut these bushings down a little bit, but I was able to press them in there. I did the same thing. I put the pin in and push it this far, and then I even take this and push everything over to the left to give me as much room as I've got here. Then try to get this started here, then just push it down. And as you get it close and I come on this side, stick it in, then you can push that sleeve around and from this side with this until it'll line up enough where you can push the pin on through. So that's the way that goes. Then later when we put this onto the airplane, you know it's gonna go like this in the plane as you sit there. And the other piece, the ratchet part that mounts to the airplane, then is gonna go up through there. So I actually have it installed, and I tell you in the forum that I like to go ahead and put as much of this stuff on as I can now. So I go ahead and pull these parts, and that's in the finish manual, and I give you a reference to the page and everything that it's on over here. So back over here in the finish manual, I think it was 12.1, yeah, back to page 12.1. It says installing the flap handle, and I got the figures and stuff. So I do this entire figure, which is right there, 1-13. And it's got all the hardware, seeing the parts for these ends. So this is going into the airplane. It'll be like this. These two come back, and there's a rod that you'll screw in at the last part of the install when you put the flaps in back here. This will go down a ring route, and there's a rod. And the rod, when you twist it, you'll notice that these screws turns opposite. And I'll tell you that in the form. So when you try to screw these nuts on, I'll go ahead and pull the nuts, the stop nuts. I'll put them on now. But you have to screw them. Lefty is tighty and righty is loosey. So it's opposite. They do that because the ones on the other ends will be the opposite. And when you take that rod up there, you just connect it to both ends. And when you turn the rod, you know, one direction, like this way, when you turn the rod this way, it's going to actually tighten up on both ends, and you actually adjust your flap setting. Using these rods later, you'll get it till you can move it in or out so that the flap is sitting up nice and flush with the ailerons and turtle deck and so forth. So that'll be used later. It's way easier to put these parts on now than when you've got this installed and you're up in a wing route trying to fiddle with it, and nothing prevents you from doing it now. So do this now, then later all you have to do is just stick that rod up there and boom, you're going. These parts here I always talk about. This is the parts that's going to mount onto the fuselage itself. It's in that manual, and I'll go ahead and install this on the fuselage now. There's no reason you can't. I'll back up first and just finish this. This is the handle. You'll have to put the cap on they talk about. It uses Loctite 680. That's called a retaining compound, and it's actually green. There's a picture in the manual. It looks like red, I think. That's not what it is. You should be using 680 right there, Loctite 680, which Loctite 680 is right there. And you see it's called a retaining compound. So it's not like red Loctite like you would look in the manual and think that's what it is. It is a retaining compound. So yeah, those are so tight, sometimes I've had to do a little bit of sanding. I go get my Dremel tool and just enough to get it started, you know, on the inside where I can get it halfway straight and then pound it in. The next part's the two little retaining pins. Those are the little pins that are going to go in here. That the flap handle itself has holes already in it. And then this already has the pre-drilled holes. And they line up pretty good. This last one here, it slid on pretty nice. I didn't have to grease it up or do anything or grab vice grips like I've had to the past to get it to go up to that point. So they've got it a little more refined, or these just worked out better, or I don't know what. But of course, these little pins, you know, they're cut down the center, so expandable, so you can, I pull it down about where it should go. Then I take my little pick, I put it in the hole, and I wallow. I just kind of go like this. It isn't affecting the metal, of course, but it lines those holes up perfectly on both of them. So I line them up good. I take it, I just put it on the corner of my bench, pull that back, and I use this wood part to lay it down on. And then I take a hammer, not a rubber hammer, but a real hammer with metal. And then I'll pound it and get those started. And pound them all the way down, except you need to leave a little bit sticking out, because you need to turn it back over then and make sure it's coming through straight. Those pins will turn on you, of course, not go perfectly straight. So I turn it over at that point where I can see the ends of the pins, but I haven't gotten them to try to hammer them through here yet, because it's probably not lined up. I take this pick again, and I stick it in there, and I go over, if it's over here, I'll go over and find the end and stick it in that hole, that pin, and I'll just rotate it until I've got that pin perfectly lined up with this hole, then turn it back over and pound it through. And that way it'll fit, perfectly. It's easy to line up, but that's a good thing to remember to do. So then when you go back over that's pretty much it for the flap handle. I grease everything up good, especially up in here, and I even put grease on the clasp on that pawl. Here you can see is the ratchet strap, the ratchet they call it. These have different notches in it. They're actually different for the EX2 and the EX3 because the flaps are a little bit different. I think there's a little bit less degrees of flaps in the EX3 than there is in the EX2. So they actually sent me, I built the first EX3 and they actually sent me the wrong one. It was labeled correctly for the EX3, but it was actually the wrong part. And so the flaps were way more angle. And what happened when I was doing stall testing, it was really getting a lot of buffeting in the back, and which I didn't think was right. And sure enough, we actually measured the one I had against the one it should be, and I had the one that had too much flaps. The EX3, they pulled some flaps out, I guess because of that buffeting issue at stall with full flaps, so it made a difference. I'm trying to remember, I think it was like 46 degrees of flaps, I believe, with the EX3, and I think we're right at 50 with the EX2, so a few degrees less. Anyway, pull all these parts, and I have not, if you look at this part here, this is something that they did in the EX3, well, maybe even the EX2, I think the EX3, but they've never had this part ever. They will in the future. I just did an update with them yesterday with Pete, and the whole list of items that I found that were still not in the bill of materials that they had for certain parts that are needed in every kit that have not been included. And they did do an update just yesterday and sent me that confirmation that it was now updated. So if you get a kit, this is December of 2021. So if you get a kit after that point, hopefully they'll get that changed or they pull the parts. These little parts here, these bolts that we use here, this AN3H11A, which is in tote 3 of mine, you notice that they're drilled heads. You see them right there. These are drilled heads. So the opposite, they're not drilled threads, they're drilled heads. And this is a little piece, the piece that goes below them, it has a washer, 10Ls, but it also has this piece right here. And this is a little metal piece that goes across, all the way across them, and you put the bolts in, and then you bend the tabs on the side. There's little tabs here that are flat. You bend them up so they lock into the sides of the bolts so they can't turn. And it's the same thing as wiring them. So I've never had that in any kit. And the first few kits, I didn't wait on them. Mitch had just told me at the time, it's fine, just go ahead and safety wire them. So I would just go ahead, since they're drilled, I would safety wire this one to that one and be fine. If you do that, you got to add another washer to it because you're removing that piece that would have been in there taking up some of the slack. These bolts are going through the fuselage up into the flap handle, and these actually, of course, swivel. See, these move because as you move the flap handle, it's going to move, and they'll actually slide back and forth and move. But so right now, I've got the hardware pulled and installed. I'm going to wait for those to get here, and if they get here pretty quick, I'll do it. If not, I'll just go up there and safety wire them. But anyway, that's the way that looks. And then when you go to the fuselage itself, this is where this is going to go, like this. And it gives you the hardware call out coming across there. I do believe that they had too thick of a washer. I maybe had to go to an L washer on this side to make it to where you could get it tightened up and get the cotter pin in. I think they had 416 and 416 or 10s. I can't remember which it was. Anyway, they had full-size washers here, but I had to cut it down over here just so I could tighten it down enough. If you still want it, you don't want anything up here tight on this flat panel. You can see I've greased it. I greased that up good. And then when I install it, I'll grease these edges, all these real good, where that pawl will go in and grab it and put that in there. But once you get the right parts, then you see these holes are pre-drilled here. In fact, they still got the plugs keeping the powder coat out of here. And they'll go up, both bolts go up through here. And that top of that flap rod sits, a flat panel rod attachment sits there, and it goes right up and screws into them there on both sides. And like I say, you can wiggle those. When you get one side on, you'll go over there and this one won't quite line up. But not to worry, like I say, these, you can move these around, you can wiggle them. They'll even slide in and out a little bit, so you'll line it up with the other side and then put the two bolts up and tighten them up. So I'm gonna hang on to it and see if I get those parts. But pretty much that's the flap handle. And if you concentrate on getting this part right, get this bend right, and make sure before you secure it all that it's working real nice and smooth. And after I've got it all greased up, I still take it and I go in right in here and I just spray down in that tube some of the liquid lubricant. And then I just kind of rotate it and I let it run around and I work it a bunch of times to make sure I've got plenty of lubrication on there so it slides nice and easily. You may even find that you need to do that every year or something, ever so often. If you ever find this is kind of hanging up or getting stiff again, just do the same thing, lubricate that and then spray down on that rod. But like I say, put a little grease on it, take a little grease in your hand, just run it down over that rod while it's in there. It's certainly not gonna hurt anything. It'll make it a lot smoother acting. So there you go, flap handle.